The crystal chandelier sparkled above the most expensive party New York had seen all year. Billionaire tech mogul. Richard Blackstone stood on his penthouse balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Tonight wasn't just any night. It was his annual charity gala, where the richest people in America gathered to write big checks and feel good about themselves. Richard loved these parties, but not for the charity work. He loved them because they reminded everyone just how powerful he was. At 52, he had built a tech empire worth $30 billion. His company had revolutionized online shopping, making him one of the most feared businessmen alive. People called him brilliant. Others called him ruthless. Richard preferred both. The penthouse was packed with familiar faces. Wall Street executives in $1,000 suits chatted with Hollywood producers. Fashion designers mingled with real estate tycoons. Everyone was someone important, and everyone knew it. The air buzzed with conversations about stock prices, movie deals, and yacht purchases. But Richard felt restless tonight. These people were all the same, rich, predictable, and honestly a bit boring. He sipped his vintage wine and scanned the room, looking for something to spice up the evening. His eyes landed on the old grand piano sitting in the corner. That piano had been his grandmother's. She used to play beautiful music on it when he was young, before she passed away 20 years ago. Since then, it had been nothing more than an expensive piece of furniture. Richard couldn't play a single note, and he didn't care to learn. Music was for people who had time to waste. The wine was making him feel bold, maybe too bold. Richard walked to the center of the room and clinked his glass with a silver spoon. The chatter died down as all eyes turned to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced with his trademark smirk, "I hope you're all enjoying yourselves tonight. I know I am, especially watching you all pretend to care about charity." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Richard's brutal honesty was legendary, but it still made people uncomfortable. "You know what I find amusing?" Richard continued, his voice getting louder. "Everyone here thinks they're cultured. You buy expensive art, attend opera shows, and name-drop famous musicians at dinner parties. But I bet none of you actually have real talent." The room grew quiet. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure where this was heading. Richard gestured toward the piano with his wine glass. "Take this beautiful instrument, for example. It's worth more than most people's houses. My grandmother used to make it sing like an angel. But I'm willing to bet that not one person in this room could play anything meaningful on it." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then his smirk grew wider. "In fact, I'm so confident about this that I'm willing to make a little wager. Anyone here who can play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, and I mean play it perfectly from beginning to end, will walk out of here tonight with $100 million. Cash." The room erupted. People started talking all at once, their voices a mix of shock, excitement, and disbelief. Did he just say 100 million? He can't be serious. That's insane, even for Richard. Richard raised his hand and the crowd quieted down again. "Oh, I'm completely serious. $100 million for anyone brave enough to sit at that piano and prove me wrong. But here's the catch. It has to be perfect. One wrong note, one missed timing, one shaky passage, and you get nothing." He looked around the room, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Come on, don't be shy. Surely someone here took piano lessons as a child? Maybe learned a few classical pieces at boarding school?" A few people actually approached the piano, but their confidence quickly melted away. The sheet music for Rachmaninoff's concerto was incredibly complex, filled with rapid passages and intricate harmonies that would challenge even professional pianists. Margaret Wellington, the wife of a banking giant, sat down at the bench first. Her fingers trembled as she tried to play the opening notes. After less than 30 seconds, she stopped, her face red with embarrassment. "I can't do it," she whispered. Two more guests attempted the piece, but both gave up within minutes. The concerto was simply beyond their abilities. Richard couldn't contain his laughter. "This is exactly what I expected. You people are all the same, rich but ordinary. You buy culture instead of creating it. You throw money at art instead of making it." His words stung, but they weren't entirely wrong. Most of the guests had inherited their wealth or made it in business, not through artistic talent. "Face it, Richard continued, now fully enjoying himself. Real talent is something you're born with. It can't be bought or learned from some expensive teacher. Either you have it or you don't. And clearly, none of you have it. Unknown to Richard and his guests, the catering staff had been watching this entire scene unfold from the kitchen doorway. Among them stood Rosa Martinez, who had worked as Richard's housekeeper for 8 years. She knew Richard better than most people, having seen both his generous moments and his cruel ones. Beside Rosa stood her daughter, 22-year-old Luna Martinez. Luna was supposed to be helping serve champagne tonight, but she had stopped moving the moment Richard mentioned the piano challenge. Her hands gripped the silver serving tray so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Luna knew something that nobody else in that room knew. She had been studying piano since she was 5 years old. Her talent was discovered by accident when a music teacher heard her humming complex melodies at her elementary school. For years, Luna had been the pride of her music teachers, winning competition after competition. She had even earned a full scholarship to the prestigious Berklee College of Music. But life had other plans. When Luna was 19, her father died in a construction accident. The family was left with overwhelming medical bills and funeral costs. Luna had to drop out of college and take any job she could find to help support her mother and 2 younger brothers. For 3 years now, Luna had worked multiple jobs, cleaning offices at night, serving at fancy parties like this one, and tutoring children in math. Her piano sat silent in their small apartment, covered with a sheet because playing it reminded her too much of dreams that seemed impossible now. But she had never stopped practicing in her mind. Every day, she mentally rehearsed the pieces she used to love. Rachmaninoff's Piano. Concerto No. 2 was one of her favorites. She could play it perfectly, even after 3 years away from professional training. Luna watched Richard continue his mocking speech, and something inside her chest began to burn. This man had everything: money, power, respect, yet he stood there ridiculing people for not having talents they never claimed to have. Meanwhile, she stood invisible in her server's uniform, possessing exactly the skill he was challenging people to demonstrate. The other catering staff had noticed Luna's reaction. Carlos, the head waiter, had worked enough high society events to recognize real talent when he saw it. "Luna," he whispered, "didn't you used to play piano, like really well?" Luna nodded slightly, still staring at Richard and his smug expression. "Girl, you should go for it," whispered another server named Diana. What's the worst that could happen? But Luna knew exactly what could happen. She could embarrass herself in front of the most powerful people in the city. She could lose her job. She could become the laughingstock of every social media platform when videos of the server who thought she was a pianist went viral. Yet as she watched Richard continue to mock and belittle people, Luna felt something she hadn't experienced in years: pure, burning determination. The guests were starting to lose interest in the challenge. It was becoming clear that nobody would step forward, and Richard would get to keep his money and his sense of superiority. "Well," Richard announced, spreading his arms wide, "I guess that settles it. Another evening where I've proven my point about the difference between real people and ordinary people. Let's get back to the party, shall we?" But as the crowd began to disperse, Luna Martinez made a decision that would change everything. She set down her serving tray, smoothed her simple black uniform, and began walking toward the piano. The room hadn't noticed her yet. She was just another invisible worker in their world of wealth and power. But in a few moments, that invisibility would shatter completely, and nothing would ever be the same again. Luna's heart pounded as she walked toward the piano, but her steps were steady and sure. The wealthy guests were too busy talking among themselves to notice her approach. She had learned to be invisible in this world of rich people, moving through their parties like a ghost in a black uniform. But Carlos noticed. The head waiter had worked with Luna on dozens of events, and he could see something different in her eyes tonight. He quickly caught up to her, gently touching her arm. "Luna, wait," he whispered urgently. "What are you doing?" Luna stopped just a few feet from the piano. The reality of what she was about to do hit her like a wave. Her hands started trembling, and suddenly she felt like she couldn't breathe. I don't know, she whispered back. This is crazy, isn't it? Before Carlos could answer, Rosa Martinez appeared beside them. Luna's mother had been watching from the kitchen doorway, and she immediately recognized the look on her daughter's face. It was the same expression Luna used to have before her piano recitals, a mix of nerves and fierce determination. "Mija?" Rosa said softly, using the Spanish word for my daughter. "What's happening?" Luna looked at her mother, and suddenly all her fears came rushing out in whispered words. "Mama, he's offering $100 million for someone to play Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. I know that piece. I could play it in my sleep. But look at me, I'm just a server. These people don't even see me as human." Rosa's eyes filled with understanding and pain. She knew exactly how talented her daughter was. For years, she had watched Luna practice for hours every day, her small fingers flying across the keys with impossible grace and precision. Rosa had cleaned houses and worked double shifts to pay for Luna's piano lessons, sacrificing everything because she believed in her daughter's gift. Then everything changed when Luna's father died. The medical bills from his cancer treatment had drained their savings. The funeral costs pushed them into debt. Luna had to make an impossible choice: continue her music education or help keep the family afloat. Without hesitation, Luna had chosen her family. She dropped out of college, packed away her sheet music, and took whatever job she could find. Rosa had watched her daughter's light dim a little more each day, and it broke her heart. "Luna," Rosa said, her voice filled with emotion, "you are the most talented musician I've ever heard. Your father used to say that when you played, angels stopped to listen. But Mama, what if I mess up? What if I embarrass us? What if Mr. Blackstone fires you for what I'm about to do?" Rosa straightened up to her full height, which wasn't very tall, but her presence filled the space around them. "Mija, your father didn't work construction for 20 years so you could hide your gifts. I didn't clean these rich people's houses so you could feel ashamed of who you are." By now, several other staff members had gathered around them. Diana, who worked in the kitchen, had tears in her eyes. "Luna, I've heard you humming while you work. Even your humming sounds like professional music." Tony, one of the security guards, nodded. "My kid goes to the community center where you sometimes help with the music program. He says you're the best teacher he's ever had." "But I haven't played seriously in 3 years," Luna protested. "My technique might be rusty. My timing could be off." Carlos shook his head. "Luna, real talent doesn't just disappear. It's like riding a bike. It stays in your muscles, in your heart." Meanwhile, the rich guests were starting to notice the small group of staff members huddled near the piano. Some looked annoyed, as if the help was getting too close to their sophisticated entertainment. Richard Blackstone was in the middle of telling a story about his latest business acquisition when he spotted the commotion. "What's all this about?" he called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. The staff members quickly dispersed, but Luna remained frozen in place. She was close enough to the piano now that she could see the sheet music clearly. The complex notes and symbols that would terrify most people looked like old friends to her. Richard walked over, his expression shifting from curiosity to annoyance. "Young lady, I believe you're supposed to be serving champagne, not standing around my piano." Luna looked up at him, and for a moment she saw past his expensive suit and arrogant smile. She saw a man who had probably never struggled for anything in his life, never had to choose between dreams and survival. "I apologize, sir," Luna said quietly. "I was just looking at the music." Richard's laugh was cold. "Looking at it? Do you even know how to read music?" Several guests had gathered around now, amused by this interaction between the billionaire and the server. Some were already pulling out their phones, sensing that something entertaining might happen. Luna felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she refused to look away from Richard's mocking eyes. "Yes, sir. I can read music." "Oh, this is rich," Richard said, turning to his guests. "The help thinks she can read classical music." The crowd chuckled, and Luna felt smaller than ever. But then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd. Luna recognized her as Mrs. Catherine Ashford, one of the city's most respected philanthropists. She was known for funding arts programs in public schools. "Mr. Blackstone, Mrs. Ashford said with quiet dignity. Perhaps instead of mocking the young woman, you should ask her if she'd like to try your challenge. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Catherine, surely you're not suggesting that a server could play Rachmaninoff. Mrs. Ashford smiled. I'm suggesting that talent doesn't come with a price tag. Some of the greatest musicians in history came from humble backgrounds. Luna felt a surge of gratitude toward the older woman, but also a fresh wave of terror. Now the attention of the entire room was focused on her. Well, Richard said, spreading his arms wide. What do you say, Miss Martinez? Luna said softly. Luna Martinez! Miss Martinez. Would you like to embarrass yourself in front of a room full of important people? Or would you prefer to return to your duties? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Luna could feel her mother's eyes on her, could sense the other staff members holding their breath. She thought about her father, who had worked with his hands his whole life but had always dreamed of being a musician. She thought about her 2 younger brothers at home, doing homework at a kitchen table covered with unpaid bills. She thought about the piano in their tiny apartment, silent under its protective sheet for 3 long years. I'd like to try, Luna said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's grin widened. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Luna took a deep breath and spoke louder. I said I'd like to try. The room exploded with whispers and laughter. Several people were definitely recording now, probably planning to post videos of the delusional server on social media later. Richard clapped his hands slowly. Well, well, this should be entertaining. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have a volunteer. Miss Martinez here believes she can earn $100 million with her musical skills. He gestured grandly toward the piano bench. Please, Miss Martinez, show us what you've got. Luna walked to the piano, each step feeling like she was walking through thick mud. Her legs were shaking and her palms were sweating. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, drowning out the whispered conversations around her. She sat down on the bench and adjusted its height, a movement so natural and automatic that several people in the crowd stopped laughing. Her posture changed as she positioned herself at the keyboard. Suddenly, she looked less like a nervous server and more like someone who belonged there. Luna placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment. In that brief silence, she remembered everything. Her first piano lesson at age 5. Her father's proud face at her recitals, the feeling of music flowing through her fingers like electricity. When she opened her eyes, Luna Martinez was no longer just a server in a black uniform. She was a musician about to prove that dreams never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to come alive again. The room held its collective breath as she prepared to play the first notes of a piece that would change everything. Luna's fingers hovered above the piano keys like a bird deciding whether to take flight. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes pressed down on her shoulders. She could hear someone in the crowd whisper, "This is going to be painful to watch." For a moment, doubt crashed over her like a cold wave. What was she doing? 3 years had passed since she'd played this piece professionally. 3 years of serving drinks, cleaning offices, and tutoring kids in math instead of practicing scales and arpeggios. What if her muscle memory had faded? What if she stumbled on the complex passages that used to flow from her fingers like water? But then, Luna heard her mother's voice, soft but clear from somewhere behind her. Breathe, mija. Just breathe. Luna took a slow, deep breath and let it out. As she did, something magical happened. The fancy penthouse around her began to fade away. The mocking laughter, the expensive champagne glasses, the glittering jewelry, it all became background noise. There was only Luna, the piano, and the music that had lived in her heart for 17 years. She pressed down on the first key. The opening note of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 rang out clear and pure. It was soft, almost hesitant, like a question being asked. Then came the second note, and the third, building the haunting melody that had made this piece one of the most beloved in classical music. The laughter in the room died instantly. Something in those first few notes was different from what they had expected. This wasn't the shaky amateur playing of someone pretending to have skills they didn't possess. This was real. Luna's left hand joined her right, adding the deep, rich bass notes that gave the piece its emotional foundation. Her fingers began to remember not just the notes, but the feeling of the music. Each key press sent familiar vibrations through her hands and upper arms. Richard Blackstone's smug smile started to waver. He had expected the girl to play a few awkward notes before giving up in embarrassment. This was not what he had planned for. As Luna moved into the first complex passage, her hands began to dance across the keys with increasing confidence. The years of practice, the hours of repetition, the muscle memory built from thousands of performances. It was all still there. Waiting just beneath the surface, Mrs. Ashford, who had studied piano herself as a young woman, felt chills run down her arms. She recognized masterful technique when she heard it. This wasn't just competent playing. This was artistry. Behind Luna, her mother Rosa stood with tears streaming down her face. She remembered all those evenings when Luna would practice this exact piece, playing it over and over until every note was perfect. Rosa had sometimes complained about the noise, but secretly, she had loved listening to her daughter's music fill their small apartment. The other staff members were frozen in amazement. Carlos, who had worked hundreds of fancy parties, had never seen anything like this. Diana kept shaking her head in disbelief, whispering, "That's our Luna. That's really our Luna up there." As the piece progressed, Luna's confidence grew. Her body began to move with the music, swaying slightly as she navigated the emotional highs and lows of Rachmaninoff's composition. Her face, which had been tight with nervousness, began to relax and show the pure joy she felt when making music. The wealthy guests stood transfixed. Many of them had attended countless concerts and opera performances, but they had never seen raw talent unveiled like this. This wasn't a polished performance in a concert hall. This was lightning in a bottle, unexpected and electric. Someone near the back of the crowd whispered, "Where did she learn to play like that?" Another person answered, "Doesn't matter where. Listen to that technique. She's incredible." Phone cameras that had been raised to record what people thought would be an embarrassing failure were now capturing something entirely different. This was becoming the kind of performance that people would share not to mock, but to celebrate. Luna reached one of the most challenging sections of the concerto, a rapid passage that required both hands to move independently at lightning speed. This was the part that separated amateur players from professionals. Her fingers flew across the keys, hitting every note with precision and grace. Richard felt his mouth go dry. He was a man who prided himself on reading people, on understanding their capabilities and limitations. He had looked at Luna and seen just another working-class girl trying to reach above her station. He had been completely, utterly wrong. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. He was actually going to have to pay out $100 million to a server, to someone he had mocked and dismissed without a second thought. His legs felt weak, and he had to lean against a nearby chair for support. But beyond his financial panic, something else was happening to Richard. The music was affecting him in ways he didn't expect. He hadn't really listened to piano music since his grandmother died, hadn't allowed himself to remember how much joy it had brought to his childhood. Now, hearing Luna play with such passion and skill, those old memories came flooding back. Luna was completely lost in the music now. Her eyes were closed, and she played from pure feeling and memory. This piece had always been special to her because it told a story of struggle, of longing, of dreams that seemed impossible but somehow persisted. As she played, Luna thought about her father, who had died before he could hear her perform this concerto at her senior recital. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed so much to nurture her daughter's talent. She thought about her brothers at home, probably doing homework and wondering when she'd be back from another long day of work. The music swelled and crescendoed, filling the penthouse with sound that seemed too big for any room to contain. Luna's technique was flawless, but more than that, her interpretation was deeply personal. She wasn't just playing the notes, she was telling her story through Rachmaninoff's composition. Several people in the crowd were openly crying now. Mrs. Ashford dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, thinking about all the young musicians whose dreams had been crushed by lack of opportunity and support. As Luna approached the final movement of the concerto, the most technically demanding and emotionally powerful section, The room was so quiet that the only sounds were the piano and the soft whisper of breathing. Even the staff from other parts of the penthouse had gathered to listen. Luna's hands moved with incredible speed and precision through the climactic passages. This was the moment that would make or break her performance. One wrong note, one missed timing, one shaky phrase, and Richard's challenge would remain unmet. But Luna didn't miss a single note. Her years of training, her natural talent, and the emotional connection she felt to the music combined into something that transcended mere performance. She was creating art in real time, in front of people who had no idea they were about to witness something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Richard watched in complete shock as this young woman he had dismissed so easily played with the skill of a concert pianist. His mind raced, trying to figure out how he had misjudged the situation so badly. Who was she? Where had she studied? How had someone with this level of talent ended up serving drinks at his party? As Luna began the final triumphant conclusion of the concerto, building to the powerful ending that would either seal her victory or confirm her defeat, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Luna's hands prepared for the final cascade of notes that would end the piece. In a few seconds, she would discover whether her leap of faith had been the smartest decision of her life or the most foolish mistake she had ever made. Luna's hands moved through the final cascade of notes like they were painting lightning across the keys. Each note rang out crystal clear, building toward the thunderous conclusion that would seal her fate. Her whole body moved with the music now, years of suppressed passion pouring out through her fingertips. The last chord exploded through the penthouse with such power that several wine glasses on nearby tables vibrated. Luna held the chord, letting it ring out for exactly the right amount of time before lifting her hands from the keys. Then came silence. Complete, absolute silence. Luna sat perfectly still on the piano bench, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes still closed. She had just played the most important performance of her life, but she was almost afraid to open her eyes and see the reaction. What if she had made mistakes she didn't notice? What if her technique had been rusty after 3 years away from serious music? The silence stretched on for what felt like forever but was probably only 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, Luna's entire future hung in the balance. Then Mrs. Ashford started clapping. It began as slow, deliberate applause, but within moments the entire room erupted. People weren't just clapping, they were cheering, shouting, some even whistling. The sound was deafening after the perfect quiet that had followed Luna's performance. Luna finally opened her eyes, and what she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the room was on their feet, giving her a standing ovation. These wealthy, sophisticated people who had gathered to mock her were now applauding with genuine enthusiasm and amazement. But the most shocking sight was Richard Blackstone himself. The billionaire stood frozen near the wall, his face completely white, his mouth hanging open like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. His usual confident posture had crumbled, and he looked like a man who had just watched his entire world turn upside down. "Incredible," someone shouted from the crowd. "That was absolutely incredible." "Where did you study?" called out another voice. "That was concert hall level playing." Luna stood up slowly from the piano bench, her legs still shaky from the adrenaline coursing through her body. She turned to face the room, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again. Not Luna the server, not Luna the struggling daughter trying to make ends meet, but Luna the musician. Her mother, Rosa, pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She reached Luna and pulled her into a fierce hug, whispering in Spanish, "I'm so proud of you, mi amor. Your father would be so proud." The embrace lasted only a moment before other people began approaching Luna. Mrs. Ashford was the first to reach her. "My dear," the elderly philanthropist said, her own eyes wet with tears. "That was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard." "You have extraordinary talent." "Thank you," Luna managed to say, still overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. A man in an expensive suit stepped forward. "I'm Jonathan Price from Metropolitan Arts Management. We represent some of the finest musicians in the country. I'd very much like to talk to you about your career. Behind him, a woman with short gray hair extended her hand. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, Dean of Admissions at Juilliard. We need to have a serious conversation about your future. Luna's head spun as more people introduced themselves. Record executives, concert promoters, music critics who had been attending the party. They all wanted to talk to her, to understand how someone with her level of skill had remained unknown. But through all the congratulations and business cards being pressed into her hands, Luna kept glancing toward Richard. The man who had started all of this with his arrogant challenge remained silent, still standing against the wall looking stunned. Finally, Luna excused herself from the crowd and walked over to him. The conversations around them died down as people realized what was happening. "Mr. Blackstone," Luna said quietly, "I believe you made a promise." Richard stared at her for a long moment, and Luna could see him struggling with emotions she couldn't quite identify. Shock, certainly. Embarrassment, definitely. But there was something else there, too, something that looked almost like wonder. Richard started, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he found himself completely speechless. This young woman had just shattered every assumption he had made about talent, about class, about who deserved respect and recognition. "How?" he finally managed to ask. "How did you learn to play like that?" Luna thought about giving him a short, simple answer, but something in his expression made her decide to tell the truth. "I started playing when I was 5, she said. "My elementary school music teacher heard me humming complicated melodies and convinced my parents to get me lessons. We couldn't really afford it, but my mother cleaned extra houses, and my father worked overtime to pay for them." Richard listened intently as Luna continued. "I got a scholarship to Berklee College of Music when I graduated high school. Full ride. They said I had the potential to be a professional concert pianist. But when I was 19, my father got sick. Cancer. The medical bills were huge, and after he died, we had funeral expenses too." Luna's voice remained steady, but Richard could hear the pain behind her words. "I dropped out of college to help support my family. I've been working 3 jobs for the past 3 years, cleaning offices at night, tutoring kids, and doing catering work like tonight. But I never stopped loving music. I just put it away for a while." The room had gone quiet again as people strained to hear Luna's story. Many of them had never heard such a personal account of sacrifice and struggle. Richard felt something crack inside his chest. He had built his fortune by being ruthless, by assuming that people's circumstances reflected their worth. He had looked at Luna in her server's uniform and seen someone beneath his notice. He had been completely, devastatingly wrong. "I owe you an apology," Richard said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I was cruel and dismissive, and you didn't deserve that." "Nobody deserves that." Luna nodded acknowledgement, but didn't let him off the hook entirely. "You made a promise in front of all these people. Mr. Blackstone, $100 million for a perfect performance of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto." Richard looked around the room at all the faces watching him. Many were holding up phones, recording this entire exchange. There was no way to back down now, even if he had wanted to. But the strange thing was, he didn't want to back down. Something about Luna's performance had changed him, had reminded him of feelings and values he had buried under decades of business deals and power plays. "You're absolutely right," Richard said, his voice growing stronger. "A promise is a promise." He pulled out his phone and made a call that would authorize the largest single payment he had ever made to an individual. As he spoke to his financial manager, arranging for the immediate transfer of $100 million to Luna Martinez, he realized that this might be the best money he had ever spent. When Richard ended the call, he looked at Luna with something approaching respect. "Miss Martinez," he said formally, "it has been my honor to witness your extraordinary talent tonight. The money will be in your account within the hour." The room erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. This wasn't just appreciation for a great performance. It was celebration of a life-changing moment. A victory for talent over prejudice, for dreams over circumstances. Luna stood there in her simple black uniform, surrounded by millionaires and celebrities, holding a phone number from Juilliard's dean and business cards from some of the most powerful people in the music industry. In one evening, everything had changed. But the most important change wasn't the money or the opportunity. It was the look in her mother's eyes, full of pride and joy and the feeling in her own heart that she had finally come home to who she was meant to be. 6 months later, Luna Martinez stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, wearing an elegant black gown instead of a server's uniform. Her hands were steady as she prepared to walk onto one of the most famous stages in the world. The sold-out crowd of 3,000 people waited in anticipation, but Luna felt calm in a way she had never experienced before. Tonight's concert was being called the Miracle Performance by music critics across the country. Videos from Richard's penthouse party had gone viral within hours of that incredible evening, viewed by millions of people who couldn't believe what they were seeing. The story of the server who shocked a billionaire had captured hearts around the world. But the real miracle wasn't just that one night. It was everything that had happened. Since the $100 million had arrived in Luna's bank account exactly as Richard promised. But Luna had surprised everyone with how she chose to use it. Instead of buying herself a mansion or luxury cars, she had done something that no one expected. She kept only $5 million for her family, enough to pay off all their debts, buy a modest house with a proper music room, and ensure her younger brothers could attend college without financial stress. The remaining $95 million went toward creating something that would have made her father proud. The Martinez Foundation for Musical Dreams was established within 2 months of that life-changing night. The foundation provided full scholarships, instruments, and professional training to talented young musicians from low-income families. Luna had partnered with music schools across the country to identify kids who had the passion and skill but lacked the resources to pursue their dreams. Richard Blackstone had become the foundation's largest corporate sponsor, contributing an additional $50 million of his own money. The man who had once mocked people for not knowing their place had undergone a transformation that surprised everyone who knew him. I spent decades believing that success meant putting other people down, Richard had told a reporter from Forbes magazine. Luna taught me that real success means lifting people up. Tonight's concert was a fundraiser for the foundation, and Luna had insisted that some of the young scholarship recipients perform alongside her. As she waited in the wings, she could hear 12-year-old Diego finishing his violin solo, a boy from her old neighborhood who had been discovered playing on a broken instrument held together with tape and rubber bands. The thunderous applause for Diego made Luna smile. She remembered that feeling, the rush of connecting with an audience through music. For 3 years, she had thought that feeling was lost to her forever. Dr. Helen Rodriguez from Juilliard appeared beside Luna, checking to make sure everything was ready for the main performance. "Are you nervous?" the dean asked gently. Luna shook her head. "Not nervous. Grateful." It had taken some negotiating, but Juilliard had allowed Luna to complete her degree through an accelerated program designed for working professionals. She attended classes during the day and continued performing in the evenings, rebuilding the technique and repertoire that had been put on hold for so long. Her mother, Rosa, sat in the front row of the concert hall, wearing a new dress that Luna had bought her but looking exactly the same otherwise. Proud, dignified, and slightly overwhelmed by how much their lives had changed. Next to Rosa sat Luna's 2 brothers, teenagers now who still teased their famous sister, but beamed with pride whenever they heard her perform. Mrs. Catherine Ashford was also in the audience, having become an unofficial mentor to Luna over the past months. The elderly philanthropist had introduced Luna to the right people in the classical music world, helping her navigate a business that could be intimidating for newcomers. As the applause for Diego died down, Luna heard her introduction beginning. The announcer's voice carried clearly through the concert hall's perfect acoustics. "Ladies and gentlemen, 6 months ago, the woman you're about to hear was working 3 jobs to support her family, her musical dreams seemingly impossible. Tonight, she performs as one of the most celebrated young pianists in America. Please welcome Luna Martinez." Luna walked onto the stage, and the audience rose to their feet before she had even reached the piano. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, and Luna had to wipe tears from her eyes as she sat down at the beautiful Steinway grand piano. The piece she had chosen for tonight was the same one that had changed her life, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. But tonight, she wasn't playing it alone. The New York Philharmonic Orchestra sat behind her, ready to provide the full orchestral accompaniment that the piece was meant to have. As Luna placed her hands on the keys, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The years of sacrifice, the night she almost gave up, the leap of faith that had changed everything. The opening notes flowed from the piano, and the orchestra joined in with the sweeping melodies that made this concerto one of the most beloved pieces in classical music. Luna's technique had improved dramatically over the past months, but more importantly, her interpretation had deepened. She played now not just with skill, but with the wisdom that comes from truly understanding struggle and triumph. In the audience, Richard Blackstone sat in a box seat, listening with an expression of wonder that had become familiar to those who knew him. The transformation in Richard had been almost as dramatic as Luna's rise to fame. He had begun studying piano himself, taking lessons twice a week from a patient teacher who was helping him rediscover the love of music his grandmother had tried to instill in him years. Richard had also changed how he ran his business empire. The company that had once been known for its ruthless corporate culture was now famous for its employee support programs, including a fund that helped workers pursue education and personal dreams. Richard still made tough business decisions, but he approached them with a humanity he had never shown before. As Luna moved through the concerto's complex middle movements, her fingers dancing across the keys with impossible grace, several people in the audience were recording the performance on their phones. But these weren't recordings meant to mock or embarrass. They were capturing a moment of pure, artistic brilliance to share with friends and family who couldn't be there. The young scholarship recipients from the Martinez Foundation watched from special seats near the stage, their eyes wide with inspiration. Many of them came from backgrounds similar to Luna's, talented kids whose families struggled to afford lessons, instruments, and opportunities. 8-year-old Maya, a violinist whose parents cleaned offices at night, leaned over to whisper to her friend, "That's going to be me someday." Her friend Jamal, a trumpet player whose father worked construction, nodded enthusiastically. "She's just like us. If she can do it, we can too." That was exactly what Luna had hoped for when she created the foundation. She wanted these kids to see that talent and dreams could overcome any obstacle, that their circumstances didn't define their potential. As the concerto built toward its powerful conclusion, Luna felt a deep sense of completion. This wasn't just a performance, it was a celebration of everyone who had supported her journey. Her parents who had sacrificed to nurture her talent, her mother who had never stopped believing, the music teachers who had recognized her potential, even Richard, who had inadvertently provided the opportunity for her dreams to resurface. The final notes rang out through Carnegie Hall with such power and beauty that several orchestra members had tears in their eyes. Luna held the last chord exactly the right amount of time before lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before the audience exploded in applause. 3,000 people rose to their feet, cheering and clapping with an enthusiasm that seemed to shake the historic building. Flowers rained down onto the stage as people tossed bouquets from the balconies. Luna stood and took her bow, but then she did something unexpected. She gestured toward the young musicians who had performed earlier, inviting them to join her on stage. As the scholarship recipients walked out and stood beside her, the applause grew even louder. This was Luna's message to the world, that talent exists everywhere, in every neighborhood and every social class, waiting for someone to recognize it and provide the opportunity for it to flourish. Later that evening, at the reception following the concert, Luna found herself in conversation with Richard. The billionaire looked different than he had 6 months ago, more relaxed, more genuine, more human. "I've been thinking about that night," Richard said quietly. "I realize now that I wasn't just wrong about you. I was wrong about everything." Luna smiled. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we've made them. Richard nodded. I want you to know that meeting you changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. Thank you for showing me what real success looks like. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Luna stood with her mother and brothers, looking out at the city lights through the reception hall's windows. 6 months ago, she had been invisible, working multiple jobs just to survive. Tonight, she was being called one of the most promising young musicians of her generation. But the most meaningful moment came when her youngest brother, now 16, and about to start college on a full academic scholarship, put his arm around her shoulder. I'm proud of you, sis, he said simply. Not because you're famous now, but because you never gave up on who you were meant to be. Luna hugged him tightly, knowing that this, her family's love, the opportunity to help other young dreamers, the chance to share her gift with the world, was worth more than any amount of money. The girl who had once been invisible had become a beacon of hope for dreamers everywhere, proving that talent, determination, and one moment of courage can change everything.